I'm going back to Oxford tomorrow, and I've had a remarkable 2 months in New Zealand, in Ngaruawahia, Hamilton, and here at the Treasury. It's a privilege to be with you all and to talk ideas. Ideas are really a game. It's a form of play. I know there are some people who think that New Zealanders would rather go around naked and talk about ideas, but I hope that this speech shows that that's patently untrue. New Zealand has its own art of the political speech. Having had over 15 years experience of working on such speeches, nearly 20 years experience of political advice at cabinet and senior officials level, I might have some experience worth sharing. I'm discussing an unusual kind of political speech. I am not discussing how we write a political rave or a harangue. I'm not telling you how to construct an airtowel machine. I'm not going to show you how to compose vogue on poetry. I'm going to be extremely difficult and add to myself the further constraint that I am not even going to discuss how a politician projects and communicates their own personality. I'm going to do precisely the opposite. This counterfactual, however, is not a Houdini act. I have not locked myself in a safe, wrapped in chains beneath the sea. There are such speeches. New Zealanders have always delivered such speeches and listened to them. The genre of oratory that I'm talking about this afternoon is the craft of the think piece, of the ideas piece, that gets people to think as citizens. We shall consider such examples in passing. We're also privileged to have leading exponents of this craft in this room today, from whom I have learned. Such modes of oratory interconnect Māori and Pākehā of New Zealand, the two peoples who encountered one another in New Zealand, co-forming a nation, came from two 19th century cultures that valued high oral performance and esteemed orators as the proof of leadership, as an index of high civilization, as the protagonists of a great dramatic event. Voices have woven New Zealand in anger, in negotiation, in recognition and acceptance, into peace. New Zealanders are as good at speeches as we've been at the art of the political cartoon. David Lowe fixed the cartoon images of Hitler, Mussolini and Stalin for all time. Subsequent cartoonists of the two tyrants have been constrained by Lowe to the extent that they must work within a Lowian register. The political think piece and idea shifter has been the genre of political rhetoric at which Deputy Prime Ministers and Ministers of Finance such as Bill English and Sir Michael Cullen have distinguished themselves. It is better to show how the mental landscape is in fact, rather than moving like an earthquake. You would have noticed the word craft, which I've just used. I don't mean that in the sense that oratory is now an antiquarian discipline superseded by modern media. It's not like arts and crafts, or pottery, or blacksmithing. I mean it, yes, in its political sense, in the old Germanic roots of power and cunning. When Sir George Grey appeared in Dunedin in 1851, the good Presbyterians there expressed their abhorrence of the governor by condemning him for kingcraft, which was part of that trinity of evil crafts that included priestcraft and witchcraft in the Scottish Reformation. The king is the sovereign who commands and compels. Who else can get people to do things but by dint of persuasion? Craft yields us two other concepts from the first exponents of oratory, the ancient Greeks. They are irony and sophistry. We're back to the question that Francis Bacon raised when he said 400 years ago, "What is truth?" asked Pilate, and stayed not for an answer. In the Platonic tradition, the sophist is the PR guy and spin doctor of ancient Greece, against which the whole order of philosophers set themselves. In a powerful images dialogue, The Sophist, Plato has Socrates propose that we all turn on the hunter of young people for their fees or interest-bearing student loans and hunt them down in turn. And this sophist will hide in the distorting mirror of language, so we must hunt him down in that mirror, segmenting it until we have trapped him. Irony is something New Zealanders used to do well. It was a characteristic, a trace element of our founding, our early literature. Sir George Grey, Samuel Butler, Catherine Mansfield, We have a Grey in the Polynesian mythology and in his dispatches, Butler in Erewhon, or Mansfield in the Prelude and at the Bay, deploy irony in the fullest logical sense. Irony is not crying pax after some banter and teasing. That's like mistaking a penalty kick for the whole game of rugby. Irony is dissimulation that brings about a disjunction between apparent representation, between apparent mimesis and the structures of language, and the semantic undertow, which may be oblique, ambivalent, or antipathetic. It is related to the Greek words for peace, irene, from which we get irenics as the antonym for polemics. Thus we realise that irony is the opposite speech mode to polemics. Irony is also, as Hayden White observes in Metahistory, the natural rhetorical mode of liberalism as a form of government. What did Sir George Grey, Samuel Butler, and Catherine Mansfield all have in common? Profound formation in Victorian elite irony. Craft in the mode of irony might well be compared to inoculation, to the pharmakon that Plato talks about. Pharmakon in ancient Greek meant both a medicine and a poison. Inoculation is something like that. An ironic speech is an inoculation. Instead of the immune system being tricked, it is the mind in this case. Preservation of the civic peace is important in New Zealand political discourse. Other modes of political expression exist which shock jocks and hate speakers and certain bloggers may use. I am only highlighting one thread of the politically possible. It is the thread I have the most experience of. The political ecosystem, however, is not one to be turned into a dust bowl, nor it is a mannered 18th century salon, as one Australian judge famously remarked of Australian constitutional discourse. Fronting up and self-effacement are the prime disposition of the speaker. The fronting up is the necessary civic act of fronting up to the crowd that demands answers. The crowd can be a Greek chorus, it could be a lynch mob, it could be a deputation of Kaumatua or an indignant group from a public meeting. It could be a run of tyre kickers coming to check the product over. In all cases, the fronting up is to one's citizen peers, even if they might guillotine you. It is the most Republican moment in New Zealand public life, locked in from the very beginnings of our polity that authority must perform an act of disclosure, an act of divulgence. The craft consists of turning potential lynch mobs into one's jurors, of turning sceptical peers into colleagues, or at least those who will give you the benefit of the doubt. The difference between the New Zealand public demanding answers and the Australian is that New Zealanders do not suspect authority, but they suspect that the truth has been withheld from them. They want to know the fact of the matter. Australians tend to suspect authority per se, which is why their Greek choruses turn into demotic frenzies of outrage and even pogroms occasionally. Hunting down governors and governors-general has been a blood sport in Australia since Captain Bligh was found cowering under a bed in 1808 in an officers' coup in Sydney. It won't be any different when they have a president one day over there. The reality in New Zealand, though, is that there is no one so clever and so intelligent that 12 good women and men, and true, may not see through them or have an inkling of untruth. What the New Zealand audiences want you to do is to fess up, as Helen Clark memorably put it. Tell it as it is, as the public keep telling us. New Zealanders are still late Victorian positivists in their tests for the truth. We're still Thomas Hardy's people out of a Hardy novel, reading Herbert Spencer, just like Premier Robert Stout did. Provide facts. Sow the text all throughout with the seeds of fact. It gives people things to check up on afterwards. Telling it as it is often involves understatement and anti-rhetoric in New Zealand. New Zealanders do not respond to local varieties of blood, sweat and tears. The fruits of victory will be ashes in our mouth, or to the new society or the new horizon. They would not like hearing about the big society. New Zealanders have a positive hunger for the truth. We are brought back to the role of the philosopher. As Plato was acutely aware, The philosopher might hunt down sophists and banish poets from his republic, but the political philosopher has sophistic and poetic guises. One day, a proportional representation political party, might get into Parliament as a rock band. And why not, if it had the right message? New Zealanders are avid to learn secrets. This is to convert them into light of day truths or expose them as falsehoods. The public are the deciders. They will bypass an airhead live media just to get at the truth of what is really ordering their world around them. I wonder if the underlay here is Presbyterian. Scotland, Canada and New Zealand are nations with strong Scottish descent populations. Certain values have entered the political culture. Scotland was about the poorest and weakest of European states from the 11th to the 18th century. It had a royal court, and so it had courtesy. It had a legal system, it had forms of government and international personality. Scots had a unique and complex yet creative relationship with the Renaissance and Reformation. What they took from the advent of printing and the new learning and the ability to get back to original sources of scripture and doctrine was a rejection of mediation. We've seen they did not like unusual mediations of power by kings, witches and warlocks and priests. When Charles I tried to impose the Book of Common Prayer at St Giles in Edinburgh, a stool was chucked at the clergyman and a riot ensued. The ornaments and rhetorical tropes of Renaissance Anglican Church English were suspicious to ears that spoke and thought in Scots. So when Helen Clark had to explain New Zealand's military support for the war against the Taliban, she declared simply that it was the decent thing. British party leaders last year, when faced with the Scottish independence referendum, began by trying to sing arias to the United Kingdom. They inadvertently deployed sophisticated rhetoric that disgusted the Scottish electorate. Polls declined for the no vote, but only by fronting up and telling it as they thought it was did polls recover. It remained constant until the second Salmon Darling debate, which finally engaged the female electorate in what had been a highly macho campaign to date. Last minute's demonstrations of passion and vehemence and conviction by Gordon Brown were indeed very necessary. It was foreseen that the final fortnight would require such a shift. But the Prime Minister, David Cameron's response to the second Darling Salmon debate showed great insight. Accepting that Scots women needed to be addressed, Mr Cameron went to the Scottish Widows' headquarters in Edinburgh, spoke with the people, not at them, and he did so with a stroke of genius. He sat on a stool, like the Irish comedian Dave Allen used to do, thereby diminishing his great height and putting himself very much on the level. It is even evident then that great irony is required, even with anti-rhetoric, to come under the range of the guns of suspicion of an audience. Forget the worm. An audience in a room subconsciously share an emotion of being relaxed, engaged, excited, bored, sceptical, irritated. A singer, a stand-up comic, a politician who's good at their job and not totally self-enthralled always picks it up. Be unafraid in the text of a few relevant footnotes. Take a warning from the poet Pindar, however, from ancient Greece. His poetry teacher there as a youth was a lady called Corinna. He turned up for poem the first time, and she pronounced it uncouth and unlearned. He came back the second time and burdened his poem with so many myths, legends and references that she warned, "Sow with the hand, not the whole bag." The third time he got it just right. We aren't academics. Satisfying these expectations means meeting a basic epistemological requirement, a basic truth test. Now I reveal my own irony, which some of you will have anticipated, which is how does the ironist persuade people of truth when their own truth is at a disjunct with the mode of delivery, might even confirm and aggravate that suspicion? How do the speaker and the audience part in peace? For the speaker is being knowingly manipulative. It's a bit like being a fast bowler. It helps to have a grip on the truth, on the logic and facts that support it. You have to aim right. It is also a play. Such a bowl is always potentially a lethal weapon. It has to be turned into a game. That is the irony. So we must tell the truth if we are to divulge it from the best state of our own understanding. Part of the relative success of the exercise comes from doing one's honest best. We must be civic and respect the profound ecosystem of civicism that sustains New Zealand, as it does not the United Kingdom at this moment. What the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur called educative dissensus avails New Zealand greatly. The art of deliberative civil prudence should be ethically assumed to be the default position for both oneself and the general public. There is jurisprudence, the science of law. There's civil prudence, a way of being reasonably wise and honest amidst probability and contingency. Civil prudence is ecologically sustainable in public discourse, and hopefully surplus adding. We must render it again. The truth that could hurt can be turned into laughter and ebullience. Ideas are dangerous things, and New Zealanders, according to some PR companies, run out of the cinemas and auditoriums screaming when ideas are mentioned. Dissimulation is necessary to get over that hurdle. Yet I assure you, audiences can be transformed into thinkers and to deliberative assemblies instead of being whipped up into gathering swine. Quiet authority and self-effacement are the ways to go. People want to see if they can be persuaded of your sense of the truth. The truth is the horizon before which you stand, the presence of the future, the possibility of pathfinding that truth. This quiet demeanour is a contribution towards a deliberative reason which everyone can pick up and use, take away and do DIY with. The don'ts are, don't pretend to superiority. You will affirm your own authority by dislocating it and not making yourself the issue. Don't be moralistic. Don't make yourself out to be politically or ideologically correct in terms of disciplines that are not epistemologically verifiable. Don't whip yourself up into a zeal. People hate dogmatists. Don't be a prick. People suspect PC. Don't be Gnostic, as if you alone have access to special insight and knowledge. People hate sorcerers, witches and wizards. Don't be a personalist. It's not a poetry reading. You're not reading out diary excerpts of your extra special, wannabe, wonderful celebrity life. Mislay the self and don't worry about it. Just take off your coat and just walk. The ethical disposition to speechcraft is the comportment of truth itself. That is more important than gesture. There is no need to do strange things in a mirror. In token of which, I shall discuss myself none of the speeches that I have worked on or contributed to, nor shall I reveal whom I have helped, with which speeches or to what extent, and what the effect of those speeches apparently was. I chose to serve. I am a veteran speechwriter. My ethical comportment, however, has to be annulment in my employer. My employer in turn has to be on a level with his or her audience and do the daring, the truly outrageous thing, which is to face personality and political brand exercises and tell the truth, argue the truth as they see it, in the language proper to them. That means that the ideas do the playing on the field, while the orator is taken for the sports commentator. The first thing is to make yourself vanish. Tell yourself that you don't matter. That way, one primary effacement is made, of effacement before the possibility of truth. For the vanishing to work, and to not leave the audience disconcerted like Bilbo Baggins with his vanishing act, the ideas must have developed a drama, close at the start, and assume lives of their own. Narrative, confident narrative construction assures the audience that this isn't a meek, timid, or bewilderingly ambivalent exercise, not some insipid sermon. And yesterday's speech is only fish and chip paper, the thing of a moment, fondled or taken to task only by historians, or else shared like a rare wine by discerning politicians. I recall the speaker Jonathan Hunt's words on Simon Upton's valedictory speech of 2000. Simon has been my teacher. He was the best all-round exponent of the arts of reason political oratory discussed in this paper. One technology of rhetoric was identified by Thomas Hobbes, the author of Leviathan, according to the All Souls Don Noel Malcolm. This is entirely the art of the ideas piece. That is, to anticipate various ideological positions of your audience and give them all an entry into the game you're offering by letting them enter it, playing the game by the rules they know, the rules they expect, on the consoles they have played it hitherto. Hobbes contrived a game in Leviathan whereby Jesuits, Machiavellians, civil republicans, jurists, absolute monarchists, Protestants, merchants, scholars, nobles, torturers, accountants, and men and women of letters.
Don't forget the socialists.
There are no socialists, thank you. Could find recognisable entrees. Of course, once within the shifting coils of Leviathan, they would discover the world as they knew it, morphing and changing all around them. Like the Rocky Horror Picture Show narrator that Robert Muldoon played, the deliverer is basically saying, while concealing the fact, I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey. A candid guile is required to lure the audience into a story, even if it is just the story of ideas and where we sit among them. I take from the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur two threefold structures for rhetorical architectonics. The first three sim as mimesis 1, mimesis 2, mimesis 3. Mimesis in Greek does not mean imitation, it means representation. And we know Picasso's portraits of women are as much portraits of women as women by Andra. Mimesis 1 refers to the rhetoric and linguistic structures and technique of the speech. Mimesis 2 is the as if. It is the make-believe, the suspension of belief, the thought experiment. Mimesis 3 is the application of the idea whereby it finds its meaning for us. These are not sequential. You don't do one, turn the ignition key and get the speech going, then rev up and fly and finish the journey to derive meaning and purpose from it. These mimetic activities all occur at once. The second triune structure relates to political philosophy itself. It consists of technique, critique, and mystique. Technique is the actual technical operations of government and power. Ricoeur discussed it in the Political Paradox of 1957 in relation to Machiavelli. That Machiavelli told power as it was his probity, Ricoeur remarked, about Renaissance power talk. A speech has to have such technique. That's its mimesis 1. Mystique refers to the arts of poetry, of poiesis. I'm using a word a Maori friend taught me in English about the kingitanga to convey the concepts of poiesis that Ricoeur talks about in French. I refer to the generation of cultural surplus out of a speech. Utopia as the mode of New Zealand poetics is the theme in this speech on which I shall conclude. Critique is necessary, absolutely necessary. Critique is the role of the philosopher, not of the sophist. Politicians undertake critique and are critiqued all the time. As Ricoeur remarks, the tyrant is the inverse of the philosopher. We know what tyrants think about free speech and free thought. George Grey and Robert Muldoon were formidably intelligent men in power in New Zealand who became tyrannical at times. Fortunately, it is rare that we have to attack personalities or institutions. It is a while since any of us have had to take up the passionate indignation of Zola's J'accuse. The perennial problem in New Zealand is ideology. New Zealanders have had resorts to ideological constructs and ideological repression that has been quite unusual among free democratic OECD nations. It may come from the totalising power of the old New Zealand state before the 1980s liberalisation. It may come from the absence of great graduate school universities like those in the North Atlantic or at ANU. Critique is first and foremost ideology critique, for Ricoeur and me. Now, we all have ideology. Napoleon was the first to dismiss an idea by saying, that's just ideology. But just as we all live in language, like fish in water, we all have ideologies, or come dripping and trailing clouds of them. I am a veritable stormfront of ideology. There's nothing wrong with ideology per se. They are structures of political rationality, narrative, justification, myth, law, political economy. They are working assemblages that we operationalise into policy. They do, however, get in the way of truth and of free inquiry. The fish have to be free to change the river that they live in. We have to be free to morph the room. Analytical tools and poiesis alike vie to alter our language. Critique then is primarily ideology critique. You do it by changing the room the audience find themselves in so they leave a different space from the one they entered 3/4 of an hour before. This is achieved by observing strict, remorseless semantic laws. It's pure information science. Deep logic encodes the organisation. Your rule must be to avoid depth. No semantic depth, no shadow, nothing Gothic, no cryptic codes poking out with secret messages, no irony beyond the irony that secures the speech exercise in the audience's mind in the first place. People don't like being conned or having one pulled over them. Projection of mental energy is quietly achieved through the modes of logic. This is an essential effacement before it leads to the prospect or possibility of truth. Your architectonics should carry the flow. Just as the ancient orator used the syllogism to reason through an argument, we must use propositional logic to test the links. Parliamentary librarian James Collier remarked that a George Grey speech was a collection of sorites, of heaps of chains based on weak predicates. All Kiwi first-year undergraduates need to do a course on logic, regardless of what they're studying. Adjustment of ideological spaces should be carried out with reasonableness and clarity, offer clean, hygienic, modernist surfaces, unstained by any passion beyond the evident conviction that delivers it. It's time for some more don'ts. Don't say you are passionate. Be passionate by doing. Passion like love is something you do, nothing you say. Don't say you are thrilled or excited. The audience wants to see that you enjoy being with them and that you like your job. Suffering servants make everyone feel miserable these days. Uncle Mickey Savage would be unelectable these days. But being thrilled and excited are messy, unpredictable, and implausible emotions. These utterances are about as believable as the pastoral joy that Vatican officials intone that they feel. No one is interested in whether you're on a high or not. Only by doing and delivering will people ascribe positive emotions to your state of mind and to your argument. Don't be horrible. Don't do anything to put a bullet through the pressurised hull of reasoned New Zealand civil discourse. Be responsible. During the Great Stink of 1858, British parliamentarians were driven out of their new Houses of Parliament by flows of raw sewage on the Thames. Don't make political discourse uninhabitable. Be responsible for good standards. The effect of Dr Brash's Herrera speech of 2004 was most interesting. He observed all the rules of good speech making proposed today, this afternoon. It was a very, very well-crafted speech. He was also a profound master of irony. In reality, he opened a window to a great stink, which until Trevor Mallard's courageous reply that July made reasoned political discourse impossible. Now, treaty scepticism is okay. I personally progressed to a better understanding of the Treaty of Waitangi and Māori rights in New Zealand by being Cartesian about the ideologies built up by Pākehā intellectuals, mind you, about the treaty. Responsible and seminal treaty sceptic texts have been written by Jeremy Waldron and Peter Adams. The test comes down to, does this speech to modify the discourse or blow it out of the water and incapacitate debate and reply? Is the speech shooting the football? Is it a terror weapon, a pulling of a knife in the brawl? Is it a proportionate response? In my view, that speech was not proportionate. It might have been sophistry posing as an ideas piece. We might have been listening to the sophist talking in Plato's mirror. It might have been an honest question, put with ironic intent. The pharmakon, the medicine recall, in ancient Greek, is both medicine and poison. Wit is a martial art. It's a survival tool in the beehive. Be prudent with wit in a speech. It may steal the speech and kill the argument. It may make people feel defenceless before a bullying, untouchable aggressor. I think that was part of the problem of David Longing. If I began a speech, for example, with the quip I used in my book on Sir George Grey, that New Zealand is proof that nature does not always abhor a vacuum, that would be very clever, but it wouldn't be very nice, and it wouldn't be very good for the speech, even though that quip is a compliment about New Zealand when you think about it. But being too clever is like bringing in an impossible depth. Don't preach. Don't be moralistic. Don't let the spittle of zeal fly. Don't pretend to be moral advantage. I now arrive at the final perspective. The New Zealand Ideas speech fronts up to the audience. It stands with its back to the future. It looks to the past to walk back into the future, taking the audience with it, ideally. New Zealand is a profoundly utopian nation. Utopics are the presence of the future. The major political party that commands utopic space usually forms a government. Māori have utopics and dystopics. Pākehā have had utopics. It is futurity, not historical adumbration, that provides the horizon for ideas pieces in our politics. Though on that I offer Sir Aparana Ngāta's magisterial, Augustinian vision of the treaty in New Zealand time from his address and reply debate speech of 1939, in the final minutes to war before World War II erupted. It is the most profound reflection on empire and power that any New Zealander has ever uttered. To take Sir George Grey's speech and the selection offered to you here today, we naturally feel repugnance at the I, me, I did it my way of Grey's self-projection. Victorian settlers, however, wanted to see the magic show act of the great man. Note, however, the deep futurity before which Grey stands and presents his audience. Those horizons have never left us. Our longue durée is the presence of the future in New Zealand. Utopia, as Ricoeur argues, is also ideology critique. The original Utopia of Thomas More was, as John Ruskin said, the one truly mischievous book ever written. Irony is the mode of the utopic, its critical force, its integration, and its organisation. It is criticism by the incoming future of the entrenched ideological present. That is why Dr Brash was so effective. He did represent a version of the future. New Zealand is all stronger now for having gone through that exercise. Immunity has been developed. The whāmakan became a medicine, not a poison. What I've presented you with today is something like the earthquake house at Te Papa. I've shaken things up and yet restored them. The books and the crockery never quite fall off the shelves. The mental space has perhaps changed, and yet it's the same room. Hopefully, I've disclosed the force of something we've long been too afraid of, the force of New Zealand minds. Thank you.